It's time for another edition of Saturday with Seniors, brought to you by FCCB's local offices in Wellsboro, Mansfield, and Blossburg. And with us today, our very special guest on Saturday with Seniors, Helen Putnam. She is 101 years old, right, Helen? Are you 101?
Yes, that's right.
Wow, 101 years. And where were you born?
In Wellsboro on East Avenue.
Well, is the house still there that you were born in?
No,
What's there now?
a different building and a different house.
So what did your parents do when you grew up? You were born during the Great Depression, right?
Yes, my father worked at the glass factory, and my mother did too. That's where they met.
And was the glass factory affected during the Great Depression? Was your dad out of work?
No.
Things continued on there. What do you remember about being young? What's some of your first memories? Do you remember your first day of school, or do you remember being a kid?
Well, we lived on Woodland Avenue, which was quite a walk to the grade school, and I walked it alone every day and home for lunch and back again.
Did you go to kindergarten or first grade? When did school start then?
There was no kindergarten then, just went to first grade.
So you walked when you were in first grade all the way back and forth to school all alone.
Yes.
Wow. Parents don't do that now with their kids.
No, they'd ride in a car.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have a car.
So how did your family get around?
They walked, or they had friends and relatives that had a car and took us places sometimes.
Did you ever take the train anywhere when you were younger? I think the train was still, at least it was still running through Mansfield then.
Yes, there was a train here, but I don't ever remember going on it. I remember my grandparents coming on the train, and we met the train and carried their suitcases up to Woodland Avenue.
So what was Wellsboro like when you were a little girl? Did you go to town often to shop? Is that where your parents got their groceries?
No, we didn't go often. Dunham's grocery store had what they called the rolling store, and that came around and had groceries in it, and you could go out and go on that big rolling truck, and your mother would pick out what she needed. And that was the way we got groceries. We had a big garden, got a lot of our food grown locally. My dad liked to garden.
What did you like to do as a young girl? Were there games that you liked to play? Did you have a bicycle? Did you have friends? How did you entertain yourself when you were in it?
No, I never had my own bicycle, but we had a tricycle. We had to put all our toys up on the porch at night. Couldn't leave them scattered around the yard for anyone to help themselves to.
So you had a responsibility even when you were very young to put things away and take care of stuff.
Right.
You said you didn't have a car growing up. How old were you before your parents got their first car? Were you still in school?
I was in high school when they got their first car, and my dad had to learn to drive then. My mother never did drive.
So your dad had learned to drive, and I don't know how you got a driver's license back then. This is the 1940s. I guess you still took a driver's test?
Yes, he had to take a test.
Do you remember what type of car he had?
It was, of course, a two-seated car. We had 5 kids, so that took up quite a lot of space in a car. And my aunt and uncle had a car, and they often took us places.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a phone in your house growing up?
Yes.
And how did that phone work? You had to call the operator first, I guess?
Yes. I was an operator. That was my first job. I worked a day and a night shift, too, at the telephone company.
And where was that located then?
Upstairs over the bank on the corner of Main Street. That was when the CCC camps were here. And those boys came to town on the back of a truck on the weekend. And they were usually, some of them, laying on the steps, the entryway that went up to the telephone office.
So why would they come to town? To get supplies, the CCC workers? Or just something to do?
To have a good time, I think.
So tell me about being an operator. I never talked to someone who was actually a phone operator. People would call you, and what would you say when you picked up when they called?
You'd say, number, please. They would tell you what number they wanted, and you would ring it for them. I've told that to people, and they say, never heard of such a thing. Always thought it was automatic.
Back in the very early, you were connecting wires, weren't you? You were patching one person, actually connecting a wire to change the call?
Uh-huh.
Wow. What are some of the other memories that you have being really young in school? What was the classroom like? How big was the classroom? Was there...
Well, the school was on Bacon Street. a few people would have cars, and if it was raining, they would come and pick up their child when school was out. And I remember when the polio vaccine was first made available, they gave the shots to kids in school. They wanted volunteers to be there to help comfort them. They cried and didn't know what it was all about, and they wanted their mother or their teacher with them. And the shots were given in the nurse's room, which was in the basement of the schoolhouse, and the principal's office was in the basement, and we could look in the window when we were out playing and see his file cabinets and things in his office. And some of the kids said those things were spanking machines for the principal to use on bad kids. But of course they were just a filing cabinet.
That's how stories go around. So polio, that's quite interesting to talk about that. Kids were scared of the vaccine. Was there a concern with the vaccine, the polio, like there was with some people had with the COVID vaccine? Were there some people who couldn't wait to get it and some people who were afraid to get it?
Yes, that's right. They didn't know there was such a thing as a vaccine to prevent something you never had.
Did you know anyone who had polio?
Yes.
Many people?
No, but I knew some that did.
Well, what was your thoughts when you got the vaccine for polio? Was it a scary situation for you, or were you okay with it?
Well, I knew what could happen if you got polio.
Yep, and that certainly almost wiped out polio. There's almost no cases left in the world. It was very successful, that vaccination, in saving lives. So where you grew up in the house, I'm going to assume that there was no electricity, or did Wellsboro have electricity when you grew up?
Yes, I had electricity in my home.
You were one of the very few in the country that had electricity 100 years ago in rural America.
Some houses didn't, but we did.
And what did you use the electricity for? What were some of the plug-in things that you had when you were a kid? I know the old homes only had a couple of outlets in them. They weren't wired with an electric outlet in every wall like now.
Well, to turn on the lights, and we had an electric iron to iron our clothes.
You did have an electric iron.
And a washing machine, things like that.
Wow, you were pretty modern with some of that stuff that people take for granted now. So did your refrigerator, did you have an iceman come?
We had an iceman that came, and he had big chunks of ice, and he knew about what quantity each house used. He had a big ice pick, and he chopped off enough to carry it into your house. And then kids would follow the truck and get little chips of ice and rinse the sawdust off from it that was packed in and eat the ice. We had a ice box. It was a big square insulated box. That was in the basement, and the iceman went down in the cellar door and went down and put the ice in the ice box. And you put the food in there around the ice. As the ice melted, sometimes the food would tip over. Not a good situation. You had a mess to clean up.
And how often did the Iceman come? Every day, or?
I think maybe once a week.
So it lasted that long. So you said your first job was working as a telephone operator in Wellsboro. How long did you do that for?
A couple years or 3.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember how much they paid you?
No, I don't remember.
But it was probably not as much as people get paid now.
Oh, no, nowhere near.
What was your next job after you were a phone operator?
Well, after I got married, we had a store. It's an office supply store on East Avenue now. We had a grocery store there.
Where Tioga Office Products is, across from Pudgy's, that was a grocery store. Where did you meet your husband?
School.
He was your high school sweetheart then?
I guess you could say that.
Someone told me that when Winkin', Blinkin', and Nod, the fountain was put on the green.
Yes, when that was first put there, they let school out early, and all the kids could go down and watch it, and the teachers.
There was a big crowd there, I believe, for the grand opening, wasn't there?
Yes.
So you remember seeing the fountain, and what were some of the other things you remember? Other stores that you liked in Wellsboro when you were at that age? Did you go into town?
Well, I remember Newberry's 5 and 10, and Mosier's 5 and 10, and Dunham's grocery store and clothing store. A lot of people couldn't go into a clothing store and buy clothes. They made them at home, or their grandmother did, or someone. That's the way we got outfitted. Our grandmother helped sew our clothes.
Everybody had a sewing machine when you were young.
Yes, just about everybody.
Now, when you go into an old houses almost never have big closets. They just have wardrobes. Your family did not probably have a lot of clothes like today's families do. Like, how many pairs of shoes did you have when you were a kid? Just a couple?
Yes.
I was reading a lot of kids went barefoot during the Great Depression. Most families only had one good set of clothing for Sunday best, right?
That's right.
And if something got ripped, you fixed it.
Yes.
Whereas today, nobody ever fixes stuff. So when you were in school, you had mentioned the file cabinet and the kids were scared that that's where the principal kept his paddles and stuff. If a kid got in trouble in school, how did they punish him?
Oh, they had to stay after school usually.
And was there sports in school when you were there?
Not as much as now.
What was the popular sport when you were in school? Was it soccer? Was it football, basketball, baseball?
No, we didn't have football then, or baseball. We had gym class for boys and girls.
What did you do in gym class? Do you remember some of the things that you did in gym class?
Oh, different exercises and different dances, and the teacher would play the piano sometimes.
So gym involved music. That's neat. I never heard of gym class where there was a piano. That's very interesting. So they teach you how to waltz and to do those types of dances in school?
Yes, we had dancing lessons, and it's part of gym.
When did you get your first car?
My husband and I bought a car together.
Most families back then had one car for a family. It was very unusual to have two cars, wasn't it?
Yes, and most families, only the men drove at first. Gradually, women learned to drive.
Why didn't women drive? Were they not allowed to get a license, or they just chose not to?
Well, men had a license, and then when women learned to drive, they had to get a license.
Well, who's the first president you remember? Do you remember Herbert Hoover, or how far back do you remember which president?
I remember voting in school for President Hoover.
You voted in school?
Yeah, of course, it wasn't a vote that counted for anything.
A mock election just to get you used to voting. So you couldn't vote until you were 21 years old, right?
Right.
Now it's 18. So when growing up during the Great Depression, how tight was money for people? Were there people on the streets trying to sell apples? You see pictures of the Great Depression when you were a little girl. And
I never saw any of that. We lived on Woodland Avenue, and that's a long ways from Main Street. And we had to walk any place we went.
Did you have a favorite song when you were young? Did you have a record player in your house?
We had a record player
with 78.
That had a crank.
And the big 78 platters that you would put on? Have you ever met anybody famous in your life?
No. Are you famous?
Right now, you're the famous person.
No, I didn't.
What kind of chores did you have to do as a kid?
Oh, we had to wash dishes, make the bed, and things like that around the house.
So what do you think about today's world versus the world you grew up in, where people don't have responsibilities, don't make the bed? You know, it's a whole different world now. What's your thoughts on today's world and the world you grew up in? Which one would you have rather grown up in?
The one I was in.
Everybody I talk to almost has the same answer every time, saying they really like the way that life was growing up then. So were there a lot of horses around when you were younger? Would you see carriages coming by with horses? Do you remember that? Was there more cars or horses on the road?
There were horses. People that had a horse could get around more than the ones that didn't. The rest of us just had to walk to church or to town or like that.
So when you went to church, it was common for there to be some horses tied up outside during the service?
Yes.
What church did you attend?
Well, my uncle used to come and take us to Sunday school, and he went to the Baptist church, so that's where we started. And then my parents had always gone to the Presbyterian church, so we went there when we got a little older.
Did you go to the Arcadia Theater when you were young to see movies ever?
Yes, and Saturday morning it cost 10 cents to go to the movies. It was a special movie for kids. I remember Shirley Temple movies and taking my youngest sister to the movie. The first time she ever went was to a Shirley Temple movie.
And before the movie, were they playing cartoons or news pieces or what happened? Because I know there was a show before the movies often.
Yes, there was cartoons and news events and things like that.
This is before there were TVs. You didn't have a TV in your house growing up, you said, right? No TV until...
That's right.
It really wasn't until I think the early 50s that you could get any TV in Wellsboro, or mid-1950s, so...
I don't know. I graduated 1939 and we had more conveniences by then.
Yeah. How many were in your graduating class? Was there a big class?
Quite big, but I can't tell you how many.
Mm-hmm. At that point, when you graduated in 1939, you're probably getting most of your news from the newspaper or from the radio?
Yes, my dad had always lived in Wellsboro, and he said he could remember when there were lines of people lined up at the train station waiting for the newspapers to come in.
Wow.
We don't do that now.
No. You probably remember writing letters to people and mailing them, too, which is something we don't do anymore. You had pen pals, or did you write letters to family members out of the area?
Uh-huh.
I remember when I was a kid, it was exciting when the mailman came because sometimes there'd be something in the mail for me that I wanted. Nobody gets excited anymore. What's in the mailbox?
No.
World War II. I didn't talk with you all about that, but when World War II ended, was there a big celebration? I know in Mansfield they had a big celebration when the war ended. I don't know if you were...
Oh, yes. Everyone was happy then. Most boys that were my age were in the Army.
And everyone was worried about them. So we're doing this interview right now at Country Terrace. How long have you lived here at Country Terrace?
About 4 years.
And you enjoy it? You got a very nice room here that you invited us in to do this interview. I appreciate that.
I like it here.
They take care of you good here, right? And you made some friends here?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. This gives us plenty of information here. Thank you so much.
You're
Appreciate
welcome.
it. Helen Putnam joining us here on KC 101, 101, and you're going to be turning 102 in March, right?
Yes, on St. Patrick's Day.
Well, happy birthday to you pretty early here for that. And are you Irish by any chance?
No.
All right. Well, thank you very much. This has been Saturday with Seniors, brought to you by FCCB's local offices in Wellsboro, Mansfield, and Bloss.